Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Payan. I am with the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. I am here with some very important people to my work as well as to the communities that we are out here working with. So I'm going to start by letting each member introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with ladies first. We have Dr. Ellen Cole with us. Ellen, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ellen Cole. I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies at St. Mary's College of Maryland. I'm a human geographer by training, and I use critical race theory and feminist theories to look at the intersections between environmental policy, community activism, and government agencies.
Thank you. And we have Chris Heaney with us. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself? Dr. Heaney?
Yeah, hi. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Chris Heaney. I'm an associate professor of environmental health and engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I focus on environmental epidemiology and occupational epidemiology, and mainly ways that we can design those studies that are epidemiologic in nature to be more community-driven, to be focused on the questions that are of highest concern for communities that are often experiencing the greatest burden of exposure and also disease.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Shakobi Wilson with us. Shakobi, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Shakobi Wilson. I'm an associate professor at the School of Public Health, University of Maryland, College Park. I'm environmental health scientist. I run the Community Engagement Environmental Systems and Health Laboratory. And so I primarily do work in partnerships with community, just simply to say it, I do science for the people, science for social justice, science for action. So whether it be CAFOs, landfills, highways, the whole idea is getting, science is not a end, science is a means to an end. And making sure that the science is being done is not extractive, it's not guinea pig science, that we're not doing pain pimping science. It's all about empowerment science. And that's what I do.
So I like those words, empowerment science. I wanted this discussion to be something that I think is very necessary, very honest, and something that we don't hear a lot about. There is a great need, as you all know, for research within the communities that we work. A lot of these communities, most of them are what they call fence line communities, environmental injustice communities, people that have very little voice and usually not a seat at the table when decisions are being made. So why is it that communities have to literally look for help in getting very needed information about what is going on in their communities, things that may be impacting the public health of the community? Who would like to start? Ellen, do you have something about why this kind of information is necessary?
Sure. I mean, so for me, when I think about these questions, I look back to the systems of governance and the systems of our structures of our economic and our political and our social structures. And I, think about the ways that, our system of capitalism is built on accumulation, exploitation of labor, and how, the United States functions within a hierarchical society where, we have, communities based on race and based on gender and based on class who have privileges and those that don't. And so this kind of interaction, and you look at who has the power within our industrial settings and with our governmental settings, and who is the people that are impacted is primarily, wealthy white males who have the power in other communities that don't. And so I think that there's this interaction between how our systems of power are set up, and then that's how our laws are written to protect those systems. And so, some examples are the fact that A corporation does not have to prove that they are not harming the community. Instead, it's the community's responsibility to prove that the corporation is harming them. Industries are regulated industry by industry rather than looking at the cumulative impact in a community. And so I think all these factors work together to create a situation where the industries have the power in the situation, and the fence line communities and the communities that are being impacted are not the ones that are benefiting, and they're the ones that are bearing the brunt, both economically but also through their health.
Yeah, I'll chime in to add to that. This country was founded on a system of racism, the genocide of indigenous peoples, the biological, economic exploitation of enslaved Africans, that type of exploitation, biological exploitation, racial capitalism is baked into the fabric of our society. We have a social caste system, as was said. We have a corporate oligarchy. Mitt Romney said corporations are people too. We have a current administration which is further exploiting that, right? And so you have systems where, you have a structured inequality, right? We talk about essential workers when we think about COVID-19. Most of the essential workers are disproportionate people of color. They're the have-nots. Without them, this toxic plantation capitalism, and plantation capitalism is a term that Reverend Lawson used when he was eulogizing John Lewis. Without them, this toxic capitalism will come to a halt. So you can look at the history of exploitation in this country, from slavery to the westward expansion, exploitation of peoples, to the Black codes, the response to Reconstruction. There's been this kind of otherizing of folks based on class, based on race, based on gender, as already said, and that's the truth. So our regulatory system was never made to protect everybody. It was only made to protect those that are wealthy and white. That's why Dr. Bullock calls it the complexion for protection. So I'll stop there.
Dr. Heaney, would you like to add anything to that? And I see we have a new member, and I think it's so important that he is here, because I'll tell you what, this is what it's all about, right? Is the health of families and children, and important research that is needed. So Dr. Heaney, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what Ellen and Jacoby said is so important, and it's so on point. And one thing that I think I'll add in a way to think about it is, in this way that we're trying to think of what scientists, what we know how to do, and how to keep ourselves going in the academic realm, there's certain pressures on us. And a lot of those pressures are economic in nature. Is our science being recognized by peers in such a way that it'll be supported through federal structures of funding? And that makes me think about your question about why are there persistent knowledge gaps in certain areas? Well, what are the priorities of those funding agencies? What peer communities are driving? What scientific questions need to be answered? Is it pushing forward heavily into the next realm of the human genome, right? Is it thinking 10, 20, 30 years ahead versus how many populations still don't have basic documentation of, health promoting neighborhood environment due to things that we've known for some time that maybe not be, take the deepest science to corroborate or to confirm that they are indeed happening for a particular group of people in a particular place, right? And so I think about it as scientists, often you get consumed in this sort of, the rat race of funding and peer recognition, and not stopping to think about all the things that you know how to do, and all the tools that you have, and all the resources and capacities at academic institutions like labs to do measurements that can source track fecal pollution from pigs and chickens and CAFOs, right? Could it be used towards the places where people have the greatest concerns? And has a scientist ever sat with and listened and built partnerships and realized that they could answer questions for those communities on the front lines, even if it's not going with the conventional kind of peer academic trajectory and all that. So there's a lot of things. I'm going back to Ellen, the structures of science and the clients that we have to get to know. Program officers, you got to get to know your program officers, get to know their priorities, culture, get to know their culture, to get to know what's important to them. I think what CBPR and community-driven work is just orient yourself to be at the different table and to understand how science can be woven and designed with, by, and for, as Jacoby said, around the priorities of the residents who are living with the greatest exposure burdens. And so anyway, that's the structures, I think, also is a big reason why it can be difficult, because if you're just thinking about, as an academic, I want to have a great career or something, you're going to follow the money. And that goes back to Ellen's point, right? You follow the places where you can get funding. And so I think in this space, the greatest disproportionate burden and the adverse burden, it just takes a different person to be committed in a different way to doing science.
Yeah, and that's to add to that real quick. Chris talked about the culture of science. I think we fundamentally have a broken culture. We have a culture that exploits people. We have a scientific culture that's about pain pimping. I found it to be very macabre when you're curious about people's struggle in these communities. I've never been curious about a single thing I work on. I'm not Dr. Frankenstein. I want to solve problems with science, right? So when you incentivize people studying people's problems and not solving the problems, that's part of the problem. We have a research industrial complex that's really about, big pharma and the biomedical model of science. What's wrong with you instead of what's right with you, right? We have a lot of supposedly dispassionate science. Your science is to be objective. There's no truly objective science, folks. You have your own cultural lens, your own lived experiences, your own biases that drive the science that you do. It's about rigor, but doing science that has an impact has been emphasized by our research industrial complex. Doing the science that solves problems has not been emphasized because the folks that are most impacted by those problems are not in those rooms, not at NIH, not at the EPA, not in these boardrooms making these decisions. So lack of diversity and lack of inclusion is really what lends itself to having poor, really in many ways, bad science. We're finding a lot of bad science, and what do we get in the end? We get bad policy, get bad outcomes. I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to add on both what Jacoby is saying and what Chris is saying, and keeping to turn that critical eye on academia and science. As we often think of science, we put it up on a pedestal. Jacoby said it's objective. It's something that we forget that it's created. It's a social construction, and I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there's validity in it if there's rigor. But we have to think about who's creating the science. If we look at academia, if we look at scientists, they're primarily again white men. The questions that they ask, the approach that they take, right? These all need to be taken into consideration in thinking about how our knowledge is being produced. And again, that's not to say that they're producing, like when you ask the question, the outcome of the question is not necessarily going to be bad, but what questions are you asking? Who are you serving? What is your outcome? And I really like what Jacoby was saying is that idea of looking for problems rather than solutions. And I think, again, that goes back to our notion and our conception of this false sense of objectivity, and that scientists are supposed to be the objective observers, right? And this goes back to like we could do the history lesson of how we created this, but I mean that's who we've established this idea of science. But if we really look at it, and Chris touched on this, it's driven by funding, it's driven by trends, it's driven by all of these different notions and these conceptions of what is valid, and because of what we talked about earlier in these systems of oppression and these systems of value, which have been embedded, as Jacoby was saying, since the inception of our country, individual, fence-line communities' health and the health of the people that we have made them expendable. We have a whole group of people within our society, Black and brown, low income, indigenous peoples, who society is deemed as expendable. And so since they're expendable, their health is not as valuable. I mean, it's horrible to say, but it's not as valuable as the health of, wealthier white people. And that becomes an important thing. If our science and our construction knowledge, the knowledge that we are creating is driven by, these capitalist ideals, but these capitalist ideals are built on this expendable population, it's an inevitability that until we, and you have examples, and I think Christian Jacoby are examples of people who are taking that step back and saying, this is not actually how science should be done. But doing it at the expense of some of the things that, the funding mechanisms and the what is seen as, the peer review process. If your peers are all white men and you're talking about issues around race and gender, they don't want to hear it, right? And that impacts your productivity. It impacts how your work is seen and how you are seen, particularly, and Jacoby can speak to this better than I can, but, being a BIPOC person, you have a pedestal, you have an agenda, rather than the idea that actually really you're studying what communities need and what people need.
Exactly. Thank you for that.
Do you feel that to have academia working with citizens on the ground to produce data, that is something that is absolutely necessary in our communities here in Delaware and our environmental justice communities?
Yes, without retribution. People should be able to address these situations without retaliation from Big Ag or whoever backing these big ags. We need that because, like, you take Denrick for the matter, they're working with these companies. So we need scientists and the public health to protect us from the big corporations, to keep them from polluting us, and be able to have the evidence and the documentation showing that they're not doing things right.
Do you have a seat do you feel like you have a seat at the table?
No. If we had a seat at the table, we would have known for all these years where Mountain Air was in violations, the people in Ellendale would have had options of getting clean water years and years and years ago. We don't have a seat at the table. We're not made aware. Only time we made aware when there's a catastrophic situation. We basically just need help from the state to protect ourselves from Big Ag and all the other chemical places that wants to take over our neighborhoods.
Does your community have clean air and clean water?
No, because every time you go outside your house, it stinks. And if it stinks, it's an odor coming off. So what is in that odor? Is it gases? I mean, what is it? I mean, every time you go outside your house and you smell the odors, or you come home from work and you smell these odors, it's constantly there. No, we don't have clean air and we don't have clean water, because every time you get a bad rain and it starts to flood, where does that runoff water go? It goes into your private well.
The Community Healthy Air Act was, I guess, created, but it didn't pass law because it was an overabundance of concentrated animal feeding operations in Wycomico County, and it was 13 proposed in the Black neighborhood, and so which was really creating problems because we have a lot of respiratory illnesses, and especially in the Black neighborhood. The children of Wycomico County, there's a great asthma rate in the children of Wycomico County, and also many of these CAFOs are the one that was proposed for 13 houses would have been surrounded by nursing homes, by churches, schools, and playgrounds, and which the area was very vulnerable and still is to pollution. And we already have pollution from the dump site area and all that, it seems like these kinds of projects are put into poor communities, which create more problems. The barrier for those of us on the Eastern Shore is the Eastern Shore delegation. They have opposed the Community Health and Air Act and most environmental issues. So that's the opposition. We can't even get anybody in General Assembly from the Eastern Shore to support the Community Health and Air Act. Any help that we've gotten have been from the Western Shore. Basically, the Eastern Shore delegation thinks that Big Chicken is our savior. So they're not going to vote for anything that they think will harm Big Chicken. And the Community Health and Air was not about that. It was created to establish some type of guideline or a law to protect the citizens, because the citizens not being protected. The Environmental Protection Agency at a federal and a state level are not doing very much to prevent pollution. Like I said, on the Eastern Shore, the poultry industry is seen as king on the Eastern Shore. So anything that the industry kind of governs the way business people think, or where a lot of people think, because those industries put money into institutions, and like the universities and other institutions. So there's money, big money put into that, and so these institutions don't see, are not going to bite the hand that feeds them. And of course, regular citizens, it has taken a long time to educate and try to bring people along, because the people that it affects the most are poor. A pressure is going to have to continue. A massive pressure will have to continue. And people getting out to vote to put the right people in office would help. They need to put people in office that are environmental friendly. So I want to give credit to the organizations and the coalitions that brought us in. They were in it and working on it, and they brought us in about, I think, either late 2015 or something like that. They had already been working on it, and that's SRAP, Concerned Citizens Against CAFOs, which is local, and Assateague Coastal Trust, and other organizations. So we've been blessed. We've kind of been taught along the way, and it's going to take people being willing when we have a forum, when we have an event about environmental issues. It's going to take them learning and wanting to learn and realize that the water that we drink and the air that we breathe is very important to their health.
COVID-19 obviously has exposed a lot of what we've known for decades about the worker conditions related to industrial animal production, the CAFOs and the slaughterhouses. Can you tell us about the exposures of the workers and the conditions during the pandemic and about the protection or lack of protection happening with these immigrant workers?
Yeah, as the media has portrayed, the food processing changes, there's are essential workers, and then they're exposed and have to be there sick or not sick because they're afraid to lose their job or because they need that income to survive. So the COVID-19 have exposed them especially in the poultry industry, where it's really very little social distance, and the repetitive work that they have to do, the environment that they work, it is very pushed around by the employers. The COVID-19 with the poultry industry has been the one that suffers the most. A lot of the workers here in the area work at different plants, being Virginia and Delaware. So they travel in vans or cars that do carpooling. So they're exposed. They're very close in the car. We don't know how many workers were impacted by COVID-19. Is hard to tell, because if they get exposed, so they be put aside or sent back, and the quarantine or the time to be isolation is very hard because they live so close to each other and work close to each other.
What about workers that are specifically at these CAFOs and in these factory farms?
The ones in the chicken coops, they don't have all the equipment to work in those chicken coops condition with the fly in the air. They get exposure from the feathers to ammonia to everything else inside those chicken coops. Then they go home, and the houses are very close to the chicken coops in this area. They live in trailers, and they're very right there in the middle of all the probably 4, 5, 6 chicken coops around it. In the slaughterhouses, in the chicken coops, in the hatcheries, hopefully the employers are doing more about it. I hear in the hatcheries, they are put in different shifts to come in at different times. So not everybody comes at the same time. I hear they're giving gloves and masks. But many of them are afraid to speak out because they sign a contract with the employers that they cannot talk about the work in place. So if they do and they get caught, they will be fired. And the manure shed is also very close to the house. So they get exposed, not themselves only in the work site, but also at home with their families.
I heard a little bit about gloves and masks, so that's a start. But we keep hearing in the news, testing is the most important thing. Is there testing going on in these facilities?
They put a thermometer and check the fever, maybe ask if they have any symptoms. And many of them, they don't have any symptoms. Many with COVID-19 has been cases with no symptoms, and they come to work or go home because they've been exposed to somebody in the workplace.
And what should people know about workers' rights?
Must definitely to know there are organizations out here that provides information, services, and even legal measures if they lose or they're stopped from work. But we don't hear much about them because some of the workers are working with temp agencies, and what the temp agencies do moves them around to another company, in the area, being the Delmarva Peninsula, we have Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. So the temp agencies, with these workers, they have no sick time, no sick time, and no other medical leave or medical insurance. They don't have, they just are earning the work, the minimum wage sometimes, because these agencies sometimes take some money for themselves for arranging them a place to work. And many of them have no legal status, so they are afraid to speak up.
There were World War II prisoner camps in Maryland, I think.
Yes.
Did they have workers in there? What?
Where the farm workers, for the company, the New York Times, called how they're more in a slave condition. They have to share showers. They have to share stove. Very few have their own refrigerator in the room. Sometimes it's 2 beds in one room with very little distance, excuse me, between. They have to share the kitchen. There's males and females bathroom, and they have this particular camp is a lot better today than it used to be when I first encountered the people in there.
I've been privileged to talk to a few people about their circumstances, and more locally, this isn't from the Mount Airy community, but closer to unincorporated Milton. I remember talking to a young mother who had 2 young children at the time, was pregnant with a third, and she told me that the water quality, and she had a private well, that she would no longer, not only would she not cook with the water that came out of the well, she wouldn't bathe her children in it either, that she made an extra effort to take her children somewhere else for bathing because she didn't want that water touching their skin. I've had the privilege of attending a meeting where people had talked about what's happened in their families, birth defects, miscarriages, one after another. Nitrates are very powerful. I think the medical world acknowledges that blue baby syndrome is directly connected to nitrates, but nitrates take the oxygen out of your blood. So it's not just babies. It can be a child, an adult, somebody with asthma, somebody who's already compromised. It could be heart problems. There might be a possible connection to arthritis, other conditions, stomach diseases, cancers. It's devastating. And those families that who live in the areas where they have no choice but to use that well water, they usually have more than one health compromise going on. Asthma, possibly the stomach problems, the history of the miscarriages, that happens. And those families are devastated, and it's not like they probably don't even have medical insurance, let alone are being, I don't know what happened with the litigation because I don't have the privilege of knowing what their settlements were. But how could any amount of money pay you for the loss of a child or for your health being damaged for the rest of your life, however long that is? There's no amount of money that would satisfy anyone. And those companies, it's not just one, the big one that we hear about is Mount Airy, but these companies have no intention of trying to correct their ways, of trying to be good corporate citizens in these communities. They'll throw a chicken or a turkey at people every now and then. Maybe they'll call up $250 for a scholarship, like that'll get you very far. But that's, this is what they do. Instead of saying, you know what, we'll try to do the right thing. We're going to get the best equipment in here to clean our water. We're going to try to recycle our water to clean it to the point where we can recycle it. None of that goes on. There were attempts in the past to try to have that situation, and they got out of it, and they dumped the plan. So it continues, the pollution continues, and people who get sick are just collateral damage. It's like dead soldiers on a field. It's disgusting. And the environment here, just to speak about Sussex County, seems to be under assault, because if it's the chicken industry, they seem to be able to do whatever they want. And if it's these other industries that are like peripheral industries that are connected, they do what they want to. And in other parts of Delaware, they have other problems connected to industry and water, because I think in the name of anything goes to keep businesses here or draw them here, they'll allow them to do anything. And they don't seem to care about the pollution footprint, because if they did, we wouldn't have 90% of polluted waters here in Delaware. That wouldn't be an absolute fact. So, there are a lot of people who try to do good here. Some of them even work for the regulatory agency in a capacity where they're hired to do mitigation type things, like in the inland bays. And they have a lot of projects going on there. Those people do great work. They have a lot of volunteers interested in working on improving the environment. But this is a hard road. I can't find the right words for it. This is, how can you stop something if they're not stopping the pollution from coming in? Whatever little mitigation activity you're trying to do to improve water quality is just wiped out. It's crazy. You need to stop polluting. You need to think of better ways to dispose of waste, not just the industrial waste from chickens, but also from human waste, because that is another problem. They love to sell the beautiful environment of Sussex County, come down here, buy a house. And for the longest time, sewers and waste treatment wasn't on anybody's mind. It was a couple of years ago they started to wake up to it, but they don't build state-of-the-art treatment plants. It's usually land disposal. And because they can make money on it, they now say, this is another thing that seems to be going on in Delaware as a business activity. Other states are being allowed to bring their waste here and dispose of it on land. Again, I'm not a scientist, but that sounds pretty out there to me. How much waste can land absorb, and where does it go from there? It goes into your water supply. So.